Is DataOps the killer framework that will help deliver your analytics project on time and under budget? Will it help you deliver faster releases with low error rates? DataKitchen thinks so. And why not? They've been doing DataOps longer than anyone. Although they didn't coin the term, they did put it on the map. They have written a cookbook, they have developed the DataOps Manifesto, and they wrote the first Wikipedia page on DataOps. It gives me great pleasure to welcome my good friend Chris Bergh to the 20th episode of It Depends. Chris, over to you. Can you please introduce yourself?
Oh, thank you. Excited to be here today. So my name is Chris. I guess you could classify me as an old data nerd. I spent sort of a beginning of my life as a working class kid in Wisconsin. I went to college, taught math in the Peace Corps for 3 years, and then I realized I wanted to make some money. So I thought, hey, these computer things are interesting. So I spent about 15 years studying AI and building software at NASA and MIT, and then some startup companies, including one that got bought by Microsoft. And then about 2005, I got the itch to do data and analytics. And back then, no one really knew what data and analytics was. And so I had to explain it as charts and graphs. And so for about 7 years, I was CEO of a company that delivered insight to healthcare companies. And I had data scientists and data engineers and people that do viz work for me. And you know what? In my arrogance as a software engineer and a software engineer manager, I thought it would be easy, but it wasn't. It was very, very hard, and I had a lot to learn. And then when we sold that company to in 2012 and 13, my two co-founders and I started DataKitchen. And a lot of the lessons that we did, because running those operational analytics, dealing with errors, dealing with demanding customers who always wanted something new, and trying to make the trains run on time, and just living with the variety of people who do data and analytics. The fact that they love their tools, the fact that they're, sort of like software engineers, but sort of not, were the genesis of starting DataKitchen. And so we've been at it profitably for the last 8-9 years. We spent the first couple kind of building the company up and writing the product. And so I spent a number of years sort of writing our first product. And then when we brought it to market, we realized that sort of no one kind of understood what we were talking about. We went to our very first Hadoop Big Data conference, and I felt like I was on a freeway with cars going by 60 miles an hour, sort of waving my arms. And that's, yeah, saying, hey, pay attention. And people were asking, are you a data lake tool or an ETL tool? And no one understood what we were talking about. So kind of by requirement, we had to talk and pick the term data ops. And it wasn't always data ops. It was agile analytic operations for a while, DevOps for data science. We had a whole list. And so we've had to do a lot of work to popularize the concept. And I still do that today. I still try to talk about it and explain it. And our company's grown quite a bit, but it's part of what I do. And I do think it is the secret sauce to iterative development, to adapting agile and lean manufacturing ideas to data and analytic teams.
That's very good. Thank you so much, Chris, for getting us started. So the way we do this podcast is we divide it into 3 sections. So we talk about the market, then we will go into your product, and then we'll end up with some leadership questions. So sure. You good with that?
Happy.
All right. So let's get started. So the first question I have is, in your mind, from where you sit and what you observe, what are some of the biggest challenges in the data and analytics space?
Failure. It's sort of failure left and right. And I bring this up not to be obnoxious, but because data backs it up. Your former company said 60% of all data and analytic projects fail. We've all heard the things about models getting into production. There's been a huge amount of people who joined the data and analytic field. And we did a survey last year with data.world on the mental health of data engineers. And 78% of data engineers were so frustrated that they wanted their job to come with a therapist.
Oh my God.
And so why is that, right? And why are we're all smart people. There's been this boom in data. You can't go to a baseball game without hearing data and analytics anymore. Why is it that things are breaking so often? Why is it that people are so unhappy? And so to me, that's the biggest problem, is like the data and analytic teams are not meeting what customers want. And actually, surveys have shown, like New Vantage Associates has shown, the number of companies reporting to be data-driven is declined over time, which is the exact number that you want, because data-driven is sort of the top of the pyramid from a business perspective. So things aren't going well. And I don't think I'm making it up when I bring that as the biggest challenge.
Which is very interesting. Usually when I ask this question, I get a litany of topics, challenge 1, 2, 3, 4, and you just summarize everything into one word: failure. So that's amazing. So thank you for that. So moving on, you've been on this mission to spread the DataOps gospel, and knowing you for last many years, it hasn't been easy. Why has it been so hard to educate data professionals? And the second question I'd like to ask you is, do you see that changing in recent times?
Well, I think we're all kind of caught between this rock and a hard place, right? You have data providers and servers and tools with their own problems, and then you have customers who are constantly demanding insight. And so I think what I've learned is in those years where I was running my own team, delivering data and analytics, that challenge between that rock and the hard place drove me nuts, right? And I talked to my wife about it on and off, and I would complain. And I think 2 or 3 years into the job, she finally looked at me and said, we've been married over 30 years now. And she looked at me and said, honey, please shut up about talking about work. Either fix the problem or quit. and so like, I've been on a journey now for many years to fix the problem. And I think and so I think what's happened in the market, and what we've realized on focusing on data ops, is a lot of people are hassled and they have irate customers, and that's their world. They can't get over that, right? They sometimes go internal and they blame the customer, or sometimes they just focus on a very narrow part of the pie, and that's the state of the world. And so I think what we've realized over the last trying to talk about data ops is if you focus on the team and just reducing their hassles, getting irate customers off their back, and that will lead to more valuable insights for their end customers. And so you should start there. And I don't think data ops, I don't feel like data ops, I don't feel no longer I'm on the side of the road waving my arms. I kind of feel like I'm in the lobby of a building. I'm walking towards the elevator. I don't think we're at the top of the building yet. So I think there's a lot to go.
Sounds like the next stop is a boardroom.
Well, I want to get in the elevator first, and then we'll see what floor we get off on.
What do you think has changed? Like, why are people more amenable to data ops these days? What was that catalyst?
Well, I think another thing. So one is like a lot of people came into data and analytics, and a lot of people started to adopt the cloud. And both those things are like, the cloud talks about all this amazing stuff you can do. And yet I've run into 400-person teams building data and analytics systems in the cloud that have working on it for 2 years, have yet to ship anything to their customers. And I wouldn't call that a success, right? 2 years building something. And so people are running into these same problems. Irate customers, they're not happy, lots of hassles. And how do you actually solve that problem? And so I think that's partly, and I also think there's been some money that's come in the last couple of years to the greater data ops world, and around data observability, around data ops. And also I think more tools have been done that sort of talk about applying DevOps principles, like dbt, or there's some BI tools. So I think there's a number of factors, but like, I don't think I'm particularly smart. I think more people came in, they ran into the same stuff I am. And instead of quitting the field, they're staying with it and trying to fix it. And they're coming to the same conclusion I did.
I was also wondering, could it be because data is so foundational? It is actually, there's a lot of action happening in the data space right now. So some people moved into the data space from software engineering space. And they said, wait, we do these things in software engineering. Why aren't we applying the same principles?
Yeah. And I think it's getting better. Like when I first 7 years ago, I started to talk about data ops, and I mentioned version control, and I'd ask in a conference how
Yeah.
many people know version control, and it'd be like 5%. I asked at the MIT CDO conference how many people knew data ops, and it was, again, 5%. And so these things are getting more popular, and now it's on the order of 50, 60%. People are using version control. So the ideas are coming. And I think really the ideas of data ops come from two sources. One is DevOps and agile and software. And then second is the idea of lean manufacturing, or TQM, from the automotive industry and Deming. Because I think we do both, right? We run a manufacturing line of insight, and we're like a software team who's changing the code that's governing that cycle time. And so I think both those things are the heritage of data ops. So in some ways, data ops is intellectual property theft of people who are smarter beforehand applied to our data analytics field.
That's great. So now, thank you for taking us in that direction, because I'd love to hear what are some essential components or pillars or principles of data ops.
Well, I've lately been thinking of it as observability and automation, right? So the first thing is observe where there's problems and bottlenecks in your system. So you have a production process, data is going through it, and suddenly the model goes crazy, or suddenly the data is wrong, or suddenly your report's empty, right? Know about that. Or it's taking you, suddenly it takes you 6 weeks to deploy something in production, or maybe that's fast, it takes you 6 months. So observe things, get data on it, and then, pardon my French, automate the shit out of it. Make sure that it never happens again. Put in fixes and checks and scripts to make your life easier. So if you found a problem that the model's out of whack, write a check to monitor that model and give information somewhere so you can find it. If you have a data provider who gives you bad data, write a data check. Run that every time to make sure that you know if it's happened, and sort of fall forward and, observe a problem, observe a bottleneck, and automate it. Adopt tools like, maybe it really takes you a long time to move code from one development environment to production. There's tools to help that, move code from one environment to the other. Maybe it takes a long time to get test data. Write some scripts to automate that. And so I think that honoring those automation part is part of the journey on data ops, because a lot of times I think data and analytic people want to give insight to their customer. That's it. Everything else is for lesser beings. And I got that from software. I was a software guy 25 years ago. So honoring observability and automation is also part of the journey.
This is a very interesting point you just raised, where you said people just want to give the data to customers. So there is, in fact, I see there are 3-4 different areas, and there's a conflation of that happening. Products are morphing into other areas, and these areas are the data management vendors who are providing, all the ELT kind of capabilities. There are the data ops that are providing the code and the configuration wrapper around data management. You've got data governance, and they are the metadata management. Then you've got a whole slew of data observability vendors that have come into the picture. So the question I have is that you've got these 4 different areas. How are these overlapping? Do you see these will merge into one Uber product, or will these stay best of breed?
Well, that's the eternal software question, right? Will all of them roll up into the Uber platform and be Microsoft Office for data and analytics, or will they stay separate? I'm a believer in best of breed, because I think a lot of people have installed software that the cost of replacing it with anything is too expensive. And so I'm also a big believer that the idea of observability and automation is a separate product category from doing the actual work, from doing data governance or doing data integration and ELT and ETL, from doing data science. So they're separate things. When I'm heads down in the data doing work, that's one thing. But when I want to take that and put it in a system, put it in the assembly line with everything else, I want to know that that's going to be fast and easy. And those are 2 different activities. They parallel a software person, right? If I'm doing some JavaScript,
Yeah.
on a particular web page, right? I want to know, I'm interested in that, but I want to have a system that says, oh, I've made this change.
Mhm.
How can I tell if there's a problem before it gets into the customer?
So we talked about how these categories are starting to overlap, and then you also mentioned a product like DBT, for instance, has done some pretty amazing things, which makes me wonder, uh, how big is this data ops market? Like, in your view, how do you carve it out, and how big is it?
Well, there's difference between what you have to define what data ops is.
Correct.
And so there are people who use the term who frankly don't do data ops in my mind. They use it as a halo term. They're an ELT vendor that is data ops. And then, like, that's not data ops. You may have a tool that works a little bit better. Like, I think DBT is a great ELT tool that happens to abide by data ops principles. Fantastic, but that's not data ops. And so data ops is about automation, orchestration, testing, deployment, observability. It's about those, just like the DevOps market has similar concepts in. So that's one way to think of the split the market. And then the market size itself is still quite tiny. I imagine there's only, right now, I see data ops as an umbrella term, right? There's tools that deploy things from production. There's tools that actually do data testing. There's tools that do data ops or observability and data journeys. And there's Git, and so probably the spend now is probably less than $50 million a year in total. But I think it's got a big potential. I think it's going to be $1 billion market. And the analogy I use is that people spend about $160 billion a year to build transactional software systems. And the DevOps market is about $5 billion a year. The people spend right now maybe $80 billion to build analytic systems. So the data ops market is probably going to be a multi-billion dollar market, just on that analogy. And so you could argue it might be bigger because there's probably more data and analytic people than software engineers in the world from a seat standpoint.
So about 5 billion, $4 to $5 billion.
It's the potential market. Yeah.
Potential market, I see. So now, with all of these tools that are coming into data ops space, some that do data ops like activities, you mentioned orchestration, automation, testing, development, CI/CD kind of, and then some that are more data management with some data ops hooks attached to them. In your mind, how do you classify, if you were to create a magic quadrant, what would you do?
So we've been doing this for a bunch of years. So last 4 or 5 years, we've made a blog post called the DataOps Vendor Landscape. And so if you Google that, or the DataOps Enterprise Software Industry, and we break it down into categories around, observability, around continuous deployment, model ops. There's a whole bunch of terms, and then sort of break out some of the companies that use data ops that aren't real, that are more tools to do the work than actually tools to do data ops. So I think it's up. Also, I think the analysts like you can be a big help in trying to define the market and the term. And so, I think just because a vendor uses the word doesn't mean they actually do it.
Yeah,
and that's a common, tendency in tech companies, right? It's between marketers and engineers. Engineers like to define terms, but marketers like to get high SEO and hit Google searches, and then sell people what they have.
It's very interesting you mentioned this, because I was looking at Forrester does its wave, very similar to Magic Quadrant from Gartner, and I noticed that they have one for data catalogs, and they've had data catalog waves for many years now. It started with machine learning, then morphed into something else. The new one that just came out this year is data catalogs for data ops.
Yeah.
That's how important in their mind data ops is now.
Yeah. And I think, the precursor to Magic Quadrants, like a market guide, I understand Gartner may be working on one, and likewise, Forrester's got a precursor to their wave. And so I think that's where we are in the market. It's still early. From an analyst perspective, they're still writing market guides or on what the vendors are, because there's certain total level of spend you have to get and certain history before they publish a Magic Quadrant. But it's going to come. Maybe not. It's certainly not this year, but 2023 or 2024. I expect a Magic Quadrant to happen.
I see. It's actually interesting. I see the journey going backwards, where in Gartner, we've had Magic Quadrants and we moved to market guides because Magic Quadrant was becoming a little bit of a mishmash of apples and oranges and bananas. So we moved to market guides. So, yeah. All right. So moving on. By the way, thank you for mentioning that you have a blog. I will post that blog to the show notes after this. And so I want to ask you, what do you see as an overlap between DataOps, metadata management, and data observability? Because, like you said, there's a lot of VC money that has flown into the space. So what do you see as an overlap?
So let's take governance first. So, governance is an activity, but some of the outputs of that activity are a data catalog and data lineage. Right. And a data catalog tells you what the data is, and the data lineage tells you where it came from. Both are very good things. But they don't tell you two other important things. Is the data fresh and can I trust it? And I think DataOps provides that. Is the data fresh and can I trust it? And so, and I think that's different than lineage and catalogs. And so, I would say DataOps is kind of an adjunct to data governance. Buttresses data governance. And then I think sort of data observability. If you really look at what the vendors do, they do data testing. They do data checking. They help data engineers write data tests. And they have tools to help automate that, profile data. And we've been doing that for years. And I'm super happy. Like, I just saw someone wrote a 15-page blog on data testing that came out yesterday. Hallelujah. We've been writing about that for 5 or 6 years. I've been doing data testing since 2006. Like, it's so important to check your data. Just don't trust your data providers. And I think everyone who's been in data has been totally screwed by their data providers and totally screwed by their well-intentioned data engineers putting code into production that's wonky. Just check and prove that it works. There's this old saying from Reagan about the Cold War: trust but verify. And I think that's really a good term here and so I think data testing is part of DataOps. And I think data observability vendors have really focused on data testing. I think there's a bigger sort of DataOps observability, which is really tracking the journey of data from source to value, not only on the data part, but as it's used in every tool. And there's this mix up between what's happening in all the jobs that produce data and the data tests and what the business customer sees. And I was just on a call with a large insurance company, and she gave an example of, okay, you may have 500 jobs here, 500 jobs there, but only 50 from one set of jobs, 50 from another, joined together to produce a set of reports that this business customer's in. And so understanding the data journey and then being able to check to say, maybe the data's right, but someone screwed up the report. Or maybe the report's perfect and someone screwed up the data. Or maybe everything's perfect and the server's slow and it's going to be late. I think that sort of DataOps observability is something that we're focused on right now.
Brilliant. That is great. Another big movement these days is data mesh and data fabric. In fact, I see there's a lot of research being done right now on data products or data as a product. In your view, how does DataOps play a role in all of these areas?
Well, I think data fabric is sort of a renaming of data management tools. It's a description of the tool space, and it adds in some needed tools like streaming, the sort of sugar of promise of automatic machine learning based
and
data,
semantic layer, knowledge graph.
Yeah, semantic layer, those things, and I think those are good. It's an expansion of the category. So, but data fabric is tools. I think DataOps, or excuse me, data mesh, is an application of a concept, and that concept is domain-driven design. And what that comes from is that your people who do the work in data and analytics aren't perfectly fungible. Data engineers, data scientists, they need to know the data to be useful. You can't hop them from one data area to another. And so they get to know the data, and so put them on a certain number of data sets, and they can really get value. And that's called a mesh or a domain, and build systems around that. And therefore they know the data, buttress them with data ops automation, automated testing, deployment, observability. And then the results that they do are much more amenable to what the customers want. Because at the end of the day, the only thing that really matters is your customer getting the insight. And I think that's the concept of a data product. Thinking of like, okay, it's great you've built a database. It's great that you are following all the Gartner buzzwords, but who cares? Is your customer getting value in the data? Are they actually adopting it and using it? And I think that's the data product approach. Strip it all away and say, look, you're building something, adoption matters. And adoption doesn't come through construction. Adoption comes through iteration. And so if you can, I'm pretty humble now. When I was younger, I was perhaps more arrogant, but I just don't think I understand what customers want unless they see it first. And then give them something and then iterate quickly behind it, automate behind it, and therefore you're going to get a much better product, and you're going to learn all the things that you don't need to do. And so I'm a big believer in the concept of data mesh and the concept of data products. And I like the idea of a data fabric as a renaming of the tool set.
Wow, very nice. Thank you so much for that. That was very nicely done. We've been talking quite a bit about data ops. I just want to ask one more question, and then we will change tracks and talk about your product. What can disrupt data ops? You talked about DBT, which is data transformation, but has data ops in it. Could Snowflake introduce native data ops capabilities so you won't need a third-party software?
Well, like I said, if you go to DBT's website now and they say, DBT, build SQL-like software engineers. And I think there are a number of tools in the individual space are being more and more data ops compliant. They're thinking of the work they do as tests, or as code, they have tests, they use Git. And I think those things are really good. So I think DBT is a great ELT tool that ascribes to data ops principles. And I think they're doing a semantic layer tool. And I bet their semantic layer tool is also going to ascribe to data ops principles. And I think I've even run into a small BI company, and their whole thing is we're a data ops BI tool. And so now the question on Snowflake. Well, Snowflake's a gorilla and has a high valuation. So Snowflake is going to get into every corner of data and analytics, just like Oracle did way back when. And it's always a tension in I have everything versus I have best of breed. And so I know Snowflake, their investment fund invested in a company called DataOps.live, which has got a Snowflake sort of focused data ops tool. So yeah, I mean, Snowflake will have a data science tool. I think they bought Ability there. They'll have a BI tool. They're going to have an ELT tool. They're going to roll it all up. And that's kind of what big vendors do. Oracle did it, IBM did it. And I think, are people buying Oracle and IBM tools now? Innovation's still going to happen.
Correct. Yeah, thank you for that. Let's change tracks here and pivot to DataKitchen. What's unique about DataKitchen?
Well, I think I think we're the leader in data ops, right? So we're going to help you be more successful. But I think the first thing is that we really help you find problems and diagnose bottlenecks better than anyone else across the whole journey that data takes. I think that's the number one thing that companies should do, because really you can't focus on customer value if you've got a lot of hassles, right? And things are always breaking and your customers are always bothering you. People who do data and analytics world need flow state. They need hours of uninterrupted thought to get involved in data and do work. And so you need to finish that first. And so we've got a new product coming out that's focused on those data journeys and focused on DataOps Observability, which is the superset of data observability. And then second, once you find a problem or a bottleneck, make sure that you solve it permanently. And there's really four types of automation that need to be applied. One is sort of Airflow-like orchestration. The second is building development environments. The third is building, deploying from dev into product. And the fourth is data testing. So develop whatever flavor of automation you need, we've got a solution for it. So I don't know any vendor who's got the full suite of tools like that.
I see. So you have your own tools, and then you also integrate with other tools, correct?
Yeah, I think that's there are 50 tools in every category of ELT and ETL and data science and data visualization, and there's new ones coming out every day, old ones sunsetting. And so we've built it to plug into all those tools, not replace any of them, not replace DBT or Airflow, or even if you've got your own CI and CD tool or own Git repository. We're a very highly integrative tool. And so we just want you to do DataOps. And so you get to pick your tool and level of automation. And if you've already got some automation tool, we can work with it.
So you have your own orchestration tool, but what if a company has been a long-time user of Control M or modern tools like Apache Airflow? How would you work DataOps piece work with those tools?
First, absolutely do not replace those, right? If you like Control M, you like Airflow, fantastic, right? I think what we say is the first step on your DataOps journey is to observe problems. So you may have a Control M job and then a cron job running some Python code from your data science team. And then somebody's got to press a button to run some Tableau reports every day. Understand that data journey. Build that in one, observe that data journey day in and day out. Check the data in every place. Check the report, check the model to make sure you're giving it. And then when you find problems, automate them, write a test. If you find problems in deployment, automate that. Maybe use your favorite CI and CD tool. Maybe use DataKitchens. I don't care. I think people, I'm a technical person. People love their tools. And I'm so sick of R versus Python, Tableau versus Looker, ELT versus ETL. It's not the problem it's not the main problem. It's a sideshow. The biggest problem in data and analytics is people focusing on customer value, and it's a people and process problem, not a tool problem. Not to say that tools aren't great and people don't love them, but just I want to shoot myself the next time I hear, we're putting in a new tool and magic's going to happen and our customers are going to be happy. And I'm like, and we all know the story there. They put in a new tool. They've got to port the stuff from the old tool to the new tool. And the business customers a year later still haven't gotten what they want.
Thank you for that. So I'm sorry if I background noise here. I am very curious to hear what are some actual real life use cases where you actually help reduce the cycle time, faster and lower error rates.
Yeah, so that's the business value of DataOps, right? Is being able to have less problems that are noticed by your customer, finding them beforehand, and then being able to quickly get things into production with low risk so that you can learn what your customers really want and maximize the amount of work you don't have to do. And if you do both those things, they drive huge increases in productivity. So here's an example, and we published it and people have talked on it for years. It's a company called Celgene that got acquired by BMS. They launched a product called Otezla, and this is a marketing and sales and analytics. And it grew to $1 billion brand, which only happens like once a year. It's very rare in the world of pharma products. And to do pharma analytics, you have to integrate several hundred data sets. And a lot of times they're not aligned. So, you have to join them and work on them. And then you've got all these extroverted, loud, demanding marketing and sales and operations people who want things perfect and want it yesterday. And so you can see I know this domain very well. And so there was a team of about 10 people who did data engineering, data visualization, who actually drove all the analytics for that. Almost every other pharma company I've talked to would have a team of 100 people do it. And they would do it much worse. They'd often have things late and errors. And the amount of work that those 100-person teams would in fact be much less than the DataOps enabled 10 teams, the 10 people. So we see 5 to 10x increase in productivity, 5 to 10x decrease in error rates, and a much more happy customer. And in fact, the leader of the team once complained that he didn't have any errors, so people weren't noticing him. The trains were running on time.
He wasn't saving the day. He wasn't
saving the day. Yeah. And so I think, and I think this is, and the team they're really smart people, but they're not geniuses, right? They worked on the process and built, and they found and observed a problem somewhere, found a problem somewhere, and improved it and automated and just kept at that. And that activity, honoring that activity and driving it enabled them just to do more really good creative work, because they could focus on the cool thing, the data transformation, the model, how you do it. They could focus just on their little part and perfect that. And there was a system that they could put it into that would tell them if they'd blown anything up before it got into production.
The technology that we are looking at these days is changing pretty rapidly. We've gone from structured batch to streaming, unstructured data, reverse ETL. We talked about semantic layer, and there's metrics layer, feature stores. Data sharing has become really big. How does your product stay up to date with all these changing technologies and associated products?
Well, I think if you have a semantic layer or not, right? If you use ELT or ETL, if you do reverse ETL or just write a script to get out some data, if you've decided to use a feature store for data science or not, right? These are just things, these are tools that are acting upon data. They have an engine and they have code that runs that engine. So every tool in data and analytics now and in the future is going to follow that paradigm. So the code that drives that engine may actually be source code or maybe configuration, so it needs to be in version control. Once that runs, you need to check the data is right going in, and you need to check the results of what that tool has done. So you need testing, and you need deployment, and you need orchestration of those tools. So you still need the observability and automation, whether you have 5 tools or 15 tools. Hallelujah. You're going to need it more with 15 tools than with 5. And so I make no prediction on how many tools you should have and how tightly they should be integrated. I think I'm more let 1,000 flowers bloom. There's a lot of bright people. I have my own personal opinions on whether feature stores are needed or not and how people should be done. But that's what the miracle of capitalism is. People go out, people use it, they find value, and they grow or die. Oh, hey, I lost you. You went on mute.
Yeah. So talking about testing, so you mentioned that you do automate the test out of it. So how do you build the test cases? Are these built automatically? Do you use machine learning, or these are handcrafted? How do you do it?
Well, there's always going to be some handcrafted tests, and so if you're dealing with different domains as genomics or marketing and sales data or financial services data, or they're so different data sets that the actual domain that you're working in has some unique tests and how you're using it. But there is some stuff that is invariant across all data sets. You can profile data and use that profiling information to auto-generate tests. And so we've got a module that does that we've run at another couple of customers. So you can help get people along that path. And so, and then we've got some patterns that we've used for the years that our software enables, like location balancing, historic balancing, et cetera. And so I think the term of test is not accepted yet, and it has different meanings. So I have a duality to the nature of tests. So I say, while production's going on, you need to check the data, you need to check the integrated data, you need to check anything that's using that data, getting it out, doing data science, and those are tests, right? And so that's great. And when you run all those tests in production, you should get a big green light saying, yippee, everything's working, or a yellow light saying something's a warning.
Yeah.
Now, that's great, but I'm a developer. I've made a change to that system. You should be able to take those tests, maybe less, maybe more of them, and run them also in development. Maybe you run it on a full set of production data, or maybe you run it on a 10th the size data set. But you should be able to run those same tests and get that same sort of green, red light. And why is that? Well, I have a 22-year-old son who works at Amazon as a software engineer. Surprise, surprise. And yeah, I love my son, but his room was covered in Legos when he was growing up. It was a mess. And it was scary to go into it when he was a teenager. And he's out of the house now. But like, why did Amazon trust my 22-year-old son to put code into production in his first couple of weeks? Amazon's smart people. Well, because they built a system around my son that says you make a small change, he could make a small change and see the impact of that change on the entire world. We should benchmark our organizations to do the same. Allow 22-year-olds with a BS in computer science who come in, make a change in your ETL code, make a change in your data science code, really small, fix a bug, and have the system tell them before it gets into production whether they've broken anything downstream from it, whether it actually works. And I think we're going to be the productivity of teams, it goes through the roof when that happens, because they get more confident to make changes, and then they make more changes. They learn more what actually the customers want.
This is fantastic, Chris. That takes me to the next question, and you already starting to answer that. How do you calculate ROI of data ops, and what attributes do you look at?
So ROI is hard. We did a webinar on this. ROI of data and analytic systems are hard because, number one, is it the insight or the action from the insight that generated the ROI? And we could have a philosophical discussion of ROI of data and analytic teams. I think there's another way to think about it, is errors have a cost, right? Not meeting customer requests have a cost and lack of data trust. So you can quantify the benefits of data ops, the number of declines and errors. You can quantitatively calculate the cycle time and the productivity in terms of number of feature points or story points that your team do. And so that ROI actually has an impact. And you can say, I'm having less errors, so my team's spending less time fixing errors. I'm deploying more, so I'm getting more actual work done. And you can say, all right, I've got this much more. I have a team that's 100% because I've done data ops automation and observability. Now I'm doing the same thing that I did before with half the team. Well, maybe you want to cut half the team and save costs, or maybe they can do twice as much work, or 4 times as much work, depending upon how you automate it. And that's where the ROI is. And it depends on how you calculate ROI, right? But I think it's very clear that one of the reasons why failure is so prevalent, why data teams want therapists, is because of this. They know how much more they could do and they're not doing it. That's the core of it. It's like, and here's the core of it, and here's exactly what I felt. I'm reasonably smart. I took all this calculus, and I have guys yelling at me who spent his entire undergraduate degree drinking beer and having fun. But I was hitting the library on Saturday night.
I just had a thought. We should ask this young kid, what is the ROI on all the beer you have bought?
Yeah, well. So when I was back in 15 years ago, I was running a data and analytic team, and I was getting yelled at by people who drank a lot of beer, and I would I learned a lot of calculus, and it made me kind of mad. Yeah. And so what I've realized is part of my job then was as a data and analytic leader was to figure out how to make my team successful. And you need to figure out how to automate and observe problems. And if you do that, your team will be successful.
That's great. Chris, a lot of valuable lessons in this segment of the podcast. I have one more question. FinOps has risen to be a very big thing. In fact, the word on the street every day I hear is, in the past, past means 6 months ago, we were all focused on performance optimization, hire people, build teams, make things go faster and faster. And all of a sudden, with the fears of upcoming recession, if that happens, it shifted to cost optimization. how does DataOps in general and your product help with FinOps?
Well, our observability product allows you to see the cost of certain tools that are using our servers in your data journey. We don't optimize it, but you can see the cost. So I think it is important. However, if you actually look at the number one cost driver in data and analytic teams, it's people, not servers. And so you need to drive the biggest cost savings is going to be driving the productivity of your team. And the only way to do that is to focus on error rates and cycle time, or the best way to do that is to focus on error rates and cycle time. Don't try to give them, don't expect that new cool tool that you just installed. Their hands on the keyboard time isn't the problem. It's all the other stuff around them.
So are there actual examples where clients have come back to you and said, because we deployed your software, so this is the X amount of cost we have saved? Did you hear that?
Well, more likely what they've done is, since we've been in a sort of a boom time, they've said, wow, our customers are much happier because they trust the data and we're doing much more insight. They haven't used the opportunity of DataOps to make their team smaller yet. Although I'm afraid we may actually be entering into that part of the business cycle now, where it's about doing more with less rather than doing more.
Doing more. Yeah, just keep doing it. Stay busy. Yeah. All right, perfect. Thank you so much for all those questions. So I want to move on to the leadership space, because you started this company from scratch. What are some of the lessons that you've learned? And if you were to do things differently, what would you do?
So I guess the first thing is that we've never put any money in the company. We've never taken any money. So we've always grown from customer revenue. I think that's a really good thing to do. It's clarifying. You have to focus on making your customers successful. Two is we're focused on a mission, right? And not a user, but we're focused on a mission, making DataOps happen. And the third is just having two good co-founders. Like, it's been really important for me. They're kind of like a work marriage. And in the 8 years, we've worked together for 15, like having good people who can, you can cry on their shoulder, they can cry on yours is actually really helpful, because startups are, they're up and down, and good things happen and bad things happen. And then how would I do differently? Well, I'm an engineer and a business person, and I would get that balance right. I think in some ways I've kind of been more of an engineer than a business person.
I see.
And I've got to wear both hats. And my way is I have this CEO forum I go to once a quarter to help me be a better business person.
I see. So in your day-to-day life, how do you determine what new features to add? Because, we've talked about this ever-changing landscape and new technologies, approaches coming in. What do you do about that?
Well, we listen. So we've got users, we listen to the users. And since we need them to be successful, we're very focused on their success. And also, we're practitioners. As part of funding the company, I acted as a data engineer for 2.5 years. So I did the work. All of us founders, we're all full stack. We can all code. We can all do data engineering, data science. And so we're practitioners. We've done it, and managed teams have done it. And third, I think it's really hard to balance vision and reality in startups, because at one time, your vision does feel like you're kind of schizophrenic and you're on the side of the road waving your hands and no one's listening to you, right? And then it becomes, should you focus on something near term? Should you listen to exactly what the customers are saying or the need behind them? And I think that mix of vision and reality is hard to get right. And it's what makes it exciting and interesting, but it's also hard.
I'm amazed that in spite of starting a company, launching the whole DataOps mission, as you were saying earlier, how do you get time to do all these extra things? I know you're an avid traveler, you're an avid reader. In fact, you've told me about some books that you're reading. So I'm just, would you like to share what books are you reading, and if you have any favorite books?
Yeah, I guess what I was reading this weekend was called 7 Games of Human History. It's sort of like this not technical, but it's more like a socio historical view of games like Go and chess and their ability to be automated, and the data science and the computer scientists who automate it. So I just found it really interesting. And so it's just a very, I like to play games. I'm a computer guy. I studied AI, so I found that really interesting book. And in terms of favorite book, is like I often recommend this book, Man's Search for Meaning. And it's about a guy who was in a prison camp in the Holocaust. And I recommend it for one reason, in that the people who survived the Holocaust had this really odd combination of ruthless ability to see exactly the way the world is and hope that they're going to get through it. And I think that's a very good lesson for a lot of people. Ruthlessly see the world for exactly how it is and have some hope that it's going to get better. And I think that combination is been meaningful for me in my life.
Wow, very, very deep. Changing to travel, because you're also an avid traveler.
As you are, I found out you're an avid traveler as well.
Yes, I love traveling. It's part of my DNA. But I'm learning from some amazing trips you've done. Just a few weeks ago, since I saw you at MIT CDO IQ, you went on, I believe, West Highland Way hike in Scotland.
Yeah, when I was younger, I was a big, like, I'm going to put on a 50-pound backpack and go climb a mountain and go away for a week. And I still do some of that, but like I actually like linear travel. So there's these tours where you can go walking travel. You walk from village to village. Someone carries most of your bags. You carry a day pack, and you stay in a bed and have a beer at night and a nice food. And so I've been doing some of those. One's called the West Highland Way. So my wife and I walked with a day pack. We walked anywhere from, 8 to 14 miles a day, stayed in the bed, ate good food, had a really nice time, lots of interesting people. And so all over the world, there's these really kind of, I think of it as linear travel. You're walking from linear slow travel from place to place. And so I'm into that.
Which is the next one?
We're going to, it turns out in Japan, there's these old roads that are from the 1500s, and there's you can walk. There's an Edo era road, and so we're going to go do a walk in Japan from kind of village to village, staying in nice places, eating Japanese food at night, and then hiking during the day. And it's going to be, I love this stuff because it's I stare at a screen all the time, and like walking and being in another country, I'm forced to like disconnect from screens, which is kind of mentally good for me.
Any favorite places you'd recommend?
I've traveled quite a bit, so I like Botswana, I like Nepal, New Zealand, Norway. I like my front porch in the summer because it's screened in and quiet. So, but I'm a big believer in I like travel, and not everyone likes travel, but it's just something that I was a kid who didn't, I didn't fly in a plane until I was 21 on the way to the Peace Corps. And so like there's sort of I didn't see the ocean until I was 20. So like
making up for the lost time now.
So making up for the lost time, yeah.
Yeah. What advice would you give to listeners on this podcast? Career advice, or just in life in general?
Yeah, well, life in general. Two things. One is, I think we're all trying to be leaders in some way, right? But leadership is influence, period. Like you don't have to have a title. You just have to talk to people and present a logical argument and an emotional argument, a good story, and convince them. You've influenced them. And so you can influence your peers, you can influence people who work for you, you can influence people above you. I'm trying to influence people by doing these podcasts. And influencing is a really important skill for people to have, because if you influence someone, like I run a company, if I'm telling people what to do, I'm failing. And so if I influence them to do the right thing, then it's much better. And then the second thing is, try some new stuff and fail. Or, it's okay. Learn from it and then try it again. And that's very hard for a lot of people. And it's been hard for me. is to sort of be gentle on yourself, sort of push yourself a little. It didn't work out the way you thought, but what you learn some things, right? Yeah. And you started your own business. I started a business. It's we continue to do that throughout our life. It's not just in our 20s and 30s. There's all these cycles of trying new things, growth, rebirth, keep going through that cycle, all the way till we die, right? And I think that learn that cycle of growth and trial and success or failure is just part of life, and sort of get good at it.
Wow. I am going to remember these words. Leadership is influence.
Period.
That's a great word. Thank you. So we are coming to the end of this show. One question that I'd like to ask everyone on the show is, tell us something about you that the world doesn't know widely. Something.
So you want something personal or something business oriented?
Up to you.
Well, I this is sort of business or personal. I've been this idea of a data journey, and talking about it is something that, like, you Google it, there's not a lot of words on it. I was thinking about writing the Wikipedia article and doing a data journey manifesto, because I think it's been there's a customer journey that's been talked about in CRM for quite a few years, and customer journey mapping. And if you actually go and follow from data source to database to ETL to report to value, that's a really convoluted path in a lot of organizations. And they have no idea where it is, no idea what the problem is. And so I think sort of mapping the data journey in your organization and understanding it is really valuable. And it's not, so I want to start talking about that somehow, get the idea of a data journey out. And then, so I don't know, I guess what's another thing, personally, not a lot of people know my first job was actually a paper boy. When I was 12 years old, I delivered newspapers on a bike in Wisconsin throughout the year. That was my first job.
Wow. In winter, it just sounds.
In winter, yeah. It was, and so it was good. I was a little chubby kid, and it got my legs strong.
This is great, Chris. Thank you so much for coming on this podcast. It's been super educational and inspiring to listen to you and learn from you. Really appreciate it. Thank you, everyone, for joining this podcast. I hope you got a lot of value out of it like I did, and I'll see you next time. Thank you.
All right. Thank you much.
You're welcome.